Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rockie Awards Roundtable for this year's scripted categories. I'm Jen Kuzmic. I'm the Executive Director of the Banff World Media Festival, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here with this incredible panel who represents some of the series that were nominated in this category. We have ROBERTO TRONI. He's the Joint MD of Various Artists Limited, and he's the executive producer of I May Destroy You. Sally Woodward Gentle, who's the executive producer of Killing Eve, and also Johann Noble, who is nominated for Noughts and Crosses, and a producer on Noughts and Crosses. So first of all, welcome to all of you. Congratulations for being nominated for a Rockie Award. There are 142 nominees from 37 countries around the world. So it truly is a global competition. You represent truly the best, biggest, most exciting, coolest series that have come out this year. And so firstly, massive congrats to you on being nominated for a Rockie Award.
Thank you.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about the genesis of your projects, some of the industry trends, and kind of what's next as well, some of the creative challenges. But I think, first, listen, all of you have helmed highly successful global hits, and we're going to dive into the process of that. Noughts and Crosses, the very conceit of the show is to point out racism by presenting an alternate world dominated by African supremacy. It's really a complete flip of reality, frankly. Killing Eve, Sandra Oh, the first Asian woman to win a Golden Globe for lead actress, broke ground on that front and has been deservedly lauded for that. And of course, I May Destroy You, Michaela Cole, a Black woman, one of the most successful, exciting actor, creator, director, writer powerhouses in the industry. And yet, here we are all today. You are the people behind these groundbreaking, provocative series. And it seems to me, maybe that's an indication of where the power still sits in the industry, in the world, the behind the camera inequities that are stark. Are things really changing, in your opinion? Is there a meaningful shift in the industry, or is it a lot of performative and the inner machinations of the industry, the seat of power, are not changing? So I'm going to go first to you, Sally. What are your thoughts on that?
I genuinely think things are changing, but they won't change overnight. I know that within writing talent, directing talent, on-screen talent, I feel that representation has been stronger than it is behind the camera. And but the sad thing is, when you look behind the camera, I don't think it's really changed in the past 20 years since I've been there. It's slowly getting better. And there is a massive drive, really, I believe it, properly proactive drive to make our industry more representative of the world that we live in. But we're not there yet. But every day we have to remind ourselves that this is something that is extraordinarily important, and be very, very aware of our own internal unconscious bias about people that we've worked with in the past, and the opportunities that we need to give others. But it's also about from the ground up and making this an industry that is open to everybody and people see it as a career. I think that there is a lot of people, if you go out into the community, if you go out into in the UK, if you go out into schools, very few people understand that our industry is a proper industry where you can make a living, and the more plurality of voices, the richer it will be. It hasn't changed yet. It's getting better, but I think it's got a long way to go.
Roberta.
I'm not sure I could say anything that adds or kind of disagrees in any way with what Sally says. I think she's just absolutely said it succinctly and hit the nail on the head. I think things are changing. I think, there was a moment where people really did within the industry sort of wake up to how far we had to go, and perhaps I think how slightly complacent we had been and just assumed that I think as people sometimes do, that things are just naturally getting better and it's all a bit slow. But there was a moment a few years back when everything was brought into quite stark relief and everyone just suddenly realized, oh, it's actually worse than it was 20 years before. But yeah, we've got a very long way to go. And, you know, I do think, you know, part of, you know, in terms of picking up on what Sally was saying, you know, education and opportunities and people thinking that this is a career for them, because when you go on most sets and you look at the crews, you know, you don't see a lot of other than kind of white faces really, and it just doesn't feel that inviting an industry. And yeah, we all have to be very mindful of it and really push ourselves to kind of give people opportunities and, you know, create opportunities really.
Johann.
I've not got much more to say than what Sally and Roberto said. I think the responsibility lies with us to actively try and change it on noughts and crosses, particularly because, as you say, it sort of directly addresses the issue of racism. We tried actively, and you know, Mammoth Screen had an exec producer who's from a ethnic minority background. Both the directors, all three of the writers, and another exec producer were all from ethnic minority backgrounds, and we actively tried to go and find people to do like HODs and stuff, which is not always easy, but we did try quite hard to try and make the off-screen talent sort of match the on-screen talent in terms of when you look at it. And I think that's the only thing we can continue to do. People like us who are privileged and are privileged enough to be in this incredible industry should just actively carry on trying to do it. And I think we will, and together we will.
Of course, it's an ongoing issue, an ongoing challenge, but an ongoing goal. Do you think that shows like the ones we're talking about today, how long it's going to be before they're remarkable simply because they're incredible, and not that they are pointed to as these sometimes lonely beacons in the industry that are truly representative on screen at least? You know, how is it decades until we get there, until this isn't a thing to talk about? What do you think?
God, I hope it's not the case, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting either of you. I don't know. I don't know. I could pin it down in terms of a particular date or a time. You know, I think there is definitely a change. I'm seeing more shows with better representation, but unfortunately, I think we may have to wait until we're some way in the future and we're looking back and realizing we're not even talking about this. But from here on out, you know, it's very hard to judge. But, you know, I think, you know, I'm sure I'd speak for everyone, you know, we kind of hope that this, you know, this particular kind of period, this particular drive isn't a false dawn, and that actually it becomes a sort of, you know, I don't want to say a movement because it shouldn't be a movement, but just something which is sustained and slowly becomes, as you say, kind of, you know, just every day rather than noticeable by, you know, noticeable because it's so bloody rare.
Yeah. And that this is a proper shift, you know, that this is a moment that it's a proper shift. It's not just a woo and then we all just settle back down to how we were before. You know, it's got to be a proper shift. And I do, and it is up to us as individuals and people who can go, no, try harder, no, keep going. You know, we got to keep doing that all the time, because actually production's really hard work. Getting really great crew is really hard work. You know, at the moment, fighting for crew is like, it's a war zone. So, but it is up to us to keep the conversation going and make sure that change does happen, and it's proper and it's rooted and it's significant and it's not tokenistic. It's not the odd little bit of training here and there. It's about properly setting people up to succeed when you're bringing them into the industry.
Right. So
there's something, I think there's something else that's happening, which is driven by the audience's hunger for new stories. So when you look at Roberto's project, I May Destroy You, or you look at something like Special, which is on Netflix here in the UK, which is a very specific story about a very specific experience. If you think about Pose, which, you know, Ryan Murphy, huge thing, but it's about a very specific experience. And I think audiences are hungry for that. So I think that gives an opportunity for representation without it necessarily being pushed, because audiences want to hear more specific stories rather than just a sort of slightly generic thing. And I think that's a massive opportunity. So anybody who has a very specific story to tell should be able to tell it, and the audience will want to hear it.
Absolutely. I mean, also it is the crews, it is on screen, it is the stories, but it is the, as I said, the seat of power. It is the owners of the IP, it is the executive producers, it is the broadcasters, the streamers, the people that have power in the industry. And that is, you know, at the festival we talk about it a lot, but that is, those are the people as yourselves that we have as panelists, as speakers, and coming to the festival. And it is nowhere near where it should be, and and that trickles down. It absolutely does. So empowering more, you know, more people to have production companies of scale, you know, that really are representative, I think, is the next big piece. And it's harder. It's a lot harder. So with that said, we want to talk about your projects a little bit. And I always find it really fun to ask how, for each of you, how did this project first arrive on your desk or crystallize in your mind, if that's the case? How many years was it from the first sparkle in your eye to the first day on set? I'll go to you, Sally.
We had, as a colleague of ours in the office, who had dinner with Luke Jennings, who had written these little novellas which were published on Amazon about a female assassin called Villanelle. And our company's really tiny. And we all read them and went, well, you know, we all love a female assassin. Who doesn't love a female assassin? But at the same time, you know, there is La Femme Nikita, there is Nikita, there is Hannah, there's, you know, what is it about this that gives us the opportunity to look differently at the genre and differently at powerful women? And I'd met Phoebe, actually before Fleabag was on telly. I just read it as, you know, her one woman play. And I just thought, you know, it'd be great fun to see what does this look like through that prism. And we basically, all of us were just thinking, well, we'll just take a punt and it'll be interesting and let's see what happens. And then a British broadcaster picked it up and developed it with us. They didn't greenlight it. We then tried every other but one British broadcaster. They didn't want it. And then AMC came through the door just on a meeting in the UK. And we said, listen, this is the script that's got away. They went away, read it, loved it for what it was, loved it before Phoebe had become Phoebe, didn't really want any changes to it, completely embraced the power of it and just ran with it. So we were bloody lucky, really. It found its right home. It was sort of, you know, I think it completely found its right home. So that was probably about 2 years.
Wow.
But I'm guessing as well that, Roberto, that yours, you know, was probably quicker than that.
I think ours was a bit quicker than that. And I think exactly to use your word there, Sally, you just was really lucky. I think, you know, there was just a lot of things that happened and fell into place, which I think all of us who work in development know don't happen.
Yeah.
You know, they are the exception to the rule. And, you know, it's why I always say of this show, including, you know, how it has turned out and how it has been received, that it feels like something of a blessing, particularly for us as a kind of relatively new company. It's like it's not our first show. We've actually been quite, you know, done quite well. But, you know, the first big show, it's like, wow, how cool was that? And it, you know, to your question, you know, it didn't quite crystallize in our minds. It sort of came to us via Michaela. We were very fortunate that, I mean, I knew her very vaguely because she'd been in a show that I'd worked on, but my business partner, Phil, knew her very well because he was the head of comedy and had indeed commissioned chewing gum. So he had a, you know, very close working relationship with her. And they talked about doing something, and she was like, oh, if I had something, you know, could I bring it here? And he was like, of course, we'd be delighted. And I think simultaneously she'd been talking to the head of the BBC about an idea, this in that form. And I think he sort of said, oh, well, you know, you should possibly find some people to help you make it or work with, or that certainly have the production infrastructure to help you realize this. And she knew Phil. Luckily, as it turned out, that Piers, who was now the head of the BBC, I used to work for him. So it just was a very quick, happy marriage. And it was a sort of, you know, although there was quite a lot of work in terms of what it started at to what it became, there was a very clear proposition. And it happened in about, I'd say, about 18 months, because I think it lived in Michaela's head for quite a while. I think she'd been thinking about, obviously, you know, it's based on a true thing. And I think it had been cooking up in her head. So when it came like a torrent, like a tsunami.
Johann, what's the origin story of Noughts and Crosses?
So my involvement with Noughts and Crosses didn't start that quite close to when we started filming. I was involved with it for about a year in the final development part. But Preeti Mavahali, who was one of the execs at Mammoth Screen, had loved the books from when they were published, which I think the first one was published in 2001. And 3 commissioners ago at the BBC, somebody went, oh, we should do this. And that's probably about 7 years ago. And it took them 7 years to figure out, first of all, how to adapt what was a young adult novel for something for mainstream television. And there was lots of false starts I gathered from various people. And finally, we landed. We were extraordinarily lucky. We found a director called Kibwe Tavares, who has a background in architecture. He used to be an architect. And he started talking about the world that this takes place in. And that unlocked a lot of it for us. That sort of changed the whole, the way we approached the whole thing. He was involved in it from then on all the way through. So by the time I came on board, it was about 2 years before we filmed it. That had sort of started to happen. Everything was coming into focus, and we found the writers who could help make that vision come to life. And we were very fortunate that Mallory Blackman, who's the author of the novels, she was the Children's Laureate in Great Britain for a while, was on board all the way through and incredibly supportive of all the changes that we wanted to make it more accessible to a wider audience. So yeah, it's one of the longer ones, but it turned out okay in the end.
So 2 years, 18 months, and 7 years.
Yes.
That's probably representative of a sampling within the industry, although 2 of them were extraordinarily light speed, probably in terms of development. You know, every project here took some really big creative risks. What do you think was the biggest or one creative risk that you can draw out? Maybe it's not what we think, but was there something that, or probably multiple things in the case of these projects, that you deem as was a creative risk and you were like, no, let's go for it? Roberto.
God, I was hoping you wouldn't put me first there. I think it was just the approach to the storytelling and the subjects, really, which, it coming very much from Michaela and her having, being, quite a kind of singular mind, and an idea of how to do it, that I suppose just felt, particularly unusual for British telly, and it sort of wasn't sort of following any kind of conventional rules of kind of storytelling. And I think it was just that. But I have to say, and I'm really not just saying this, from the start, the BBC totally supported us in that. There was no feeling of, oh right, you need to, yeah, we like it, but can you kind of repackage it into something that can can be kind of neatly put into kind of tidy little boxes, and of course HBO, you know, which, you know, is very much a kind of home of quite kind of singular telly, very authored, very distinctive, you know, just got it, just that wasn't even a question. So I think it was just that, you know, and I have to say, is, you know, someone who's involved in the kind of the making of it or the realizing of it, it kind of even sort of challenged us to kind of think in different ways. You know, it's very easy to kind of package things up in a very kind of formulaic way, but suddenly kind of going, why, someone's got an idea for something, why change it? Are we just changing it just for the sake of it? Or is it just more interesting that it's idiosyncratic and not the norm? So I think that was one big thing for me.
Sally.
I mean, I think it's not the same as Roberto, but it is sort of the same as Roberto, which is, you know, is hoping that the tone works. And, you know, specifically with Killing Eve, where you've got two characters who like don't really meet, and their worlds are slightly different. One is really sort of earthy and real, and the other one was more heightened, you know, living in Paris, doing all of this, that, and the other. And, you know, moments of absurd humor mixed with sort of deep tragedy, really. And it was really like, are we ever going to get the balance right? Is it going to feel like something that's completely broken backed? Is it going to feel like a game of two halves? And it did. So I think it sort of ended up, you know, the mash of it works. And I think gradually everything sort of started to slightly bleed. But I like the fact that you can still do, you can have absurd, you can, like in Phoebe's, you know, season, you can have jokes about sausages, and yet you can, like, you know, stab someone really badly in the stomach, and you can, you know, treat your husband appallingly, and yet you can still, you know, throw a cheesy puff at somebody's head. You know, I think it was that, and hoping that would work, because I think that there was a particularly, you know, it's easier now, there's like different heads who are heads of scripted, you know, this is just all just scripted material. So to be able to do something that is both funny and tragic and dramatic and thrilling, you know, that it was great that we were just, you know, like Roberto said, the BBC did, that AMC just supported us in doing that. That was the biggest thing. It was like, oh my God, is it going to work?
Johann.
But you just, you know, actually we thought we'd flying under the radar, and if it was a bit shit, nobody would notice.
No luck.
Well, it worked fantastically well, Sally. So I think with Norton Crosses, there were two things. The first thing is that just making the show felt quite challenging, because there were lots of conversations about representation and whether you can depict a lot of people who are not white as the baddies. And if you know, there was a whole conversation about, I guess, the same kind of conversation that came about when the books were published. So there was lots of conversations about how we do that and stay true to what the story is about and what the theme of the book is about, without adding to the whole misrepresentation of people that's sort of prevalent in our society anyway. So that was the first thing. And again, you know, the people that we had on board were very passionate about what they wanted to do with the story, so that helped. So in the end, and similarly with you know, like Roberto and Sally had experienced, the BBC was always had our back on that, and always were clear about serving the spirit of Mary Blackman's books and what she was trying to achieve with it. And then I think the other creative risk that we took was to shoot it in South Africa, and shoot it as London in South Africa, which obviously does not look anything like that, and trying to create a new world that would feel like a world that was based on Afrocentric values rather than Western values. And I think the thing that we did not expect by shooting it there was that every single member of the crew and the South African cast brought a very specific understanding of that situation to the story and to the set, because of the particular history of South Africa. So that gave it an extraordinary urgency, and quite a lot of the British actors responded to that, and there was a whole understanding of what you know, this had happened in the world, and in South Africa it had happened in South Africa. And that was something that was unexpected, and I think added to the sort of veracity of the show.
And I'm sure that just, you know, added more depth and more meaning. It's each of these shows, I'm sure there was maybe one or multiple turning points where you sort of knew. You go through development hell, you get it into production, pandemic, whatever was happening. But was there a moment where you sort of knew you had lightning in a bottle? You knew, you know, maybe you were on set, maybe you were you're reading a script, maybe it was in casting, or even later, where you personally thought, oh my God, we have something really, really special here. Was there a moment like that for you, Sally?
Well, I always loved the scripts and completely believed in them, and completely believed in, you know, Phoebe's idiosyncratic genius. But on set, I think it was the moment where you've got, I don't know if anybody will remember it, but in scene episode 1 or 2, I can't remember which one it is, and Jodie's sitting in the pink frou-frou frock with the psychiatrist, and the camera is really tight on her face, and she has to throw a whole gamut of emotions at that during that scene, which were really quite hard to sort of navigate when we were writing the scene, and she sort of nailed all of it. And it was very early on in filming, and she'd come onto set, and actually she you know, she had a little bit of a tough time with a bereavement, and so she was, I think she just went for it with instinct and totally nailed it. And you thought, because you don't know, you cast somebody, go, well, I hope they're going to be great, and she was just amazing. And then, you know, the fact that Sandra, you know, American actor coming over to the UK, trying to fit into the British vernacular, there's always a concern that might not work, and Sandra just totally nailed it too. So that was brilliant. But you don't know. I mean, I always, you know, I never know. I just, you know, you just hold on for dear life and hope it's good, and go with your gut. And I don't think you ever know you've got lightning in a bottle. I never feel that. I always think somebody's going to say it's a bit shit.
How about you, Johann?
But that's because I'm a girl.
Oh,
I don't know about that.
I was going to say, I'm sure that's why we'd be anxious.
You never know. You never ever know. And I don't know if it's like what it's like for you guys, but I go through the process 3 times where you fall in love with the script, and by the end of development process, you hate the script. And you fall in love with it when you start filming on the first day, and by the end you hate it. And then when you start on post-production, you love it, then you hate it, then hopefully by the end you love it again. So it's that kind of roller coaster emotional ride. But in Noughts and Crosses, there was one moment which I read in the book, and then I saw it and I went, if this works, maybe it'll work. And it's the plaster moment. I don't know if you've seen it, but
Yes.
the plaster moment is the moment where you go, that's what the whole show is about. And we understood that if we can make the whole show reflect that, I think it's probably going to be okay.
Yeah, it was that was absolutely significant. And you're right, it was a moment when you saw the color of the plaster, or the bandage, or the Band-Aid as we call it over here. That is 1000% goes right to the very core of it. Roberto, was there a moment for you throughout the process where you knew, oh my God, this is unbelievable?
I mean, you know, when you say you knew, I mean, I don't know if you know that it's going to be well received or it's going to be successful, but I think there were, you know, I think I felt pretty confident from early on that it would be a really good piece of work, that it was a piece of work with something to say and an interesting way of saying it. You know, I think at the very beginning of the process, there was a point where Michaela just had sort of just like written in a fury and written about 8 scripts, you know, some of which ended up being used, some bits junked, whatever. But I do remember reading those very early drafts and thinking, okay, well, she's the real deal then. She's got something to say. This isn't, this is really interesting, and you didn't always understand it and stuff got moved around. But I was like, oh, okay, right. So she's the real deal. Okay, we're on something, this is not a joke. This is incredible. And then, there was a moment in filming, there was one day actually quite early on, because oddly, because you're working with Michaela, who's a co-exec with us, the writer and the co-director, but there's a moment where you kind of, for a process, you sort of forget about her slightly as the actor as well, because I've never done that. And there was a moment on the first week where, we had to film in a way that wasn't all, wouldn't have immediately struck me as the most sensible or practical, which is we shot the whole thing multi-episodic. And there was a day when I was looking at the rushes where she'd filmed a scene from Ep 1, a scene from Ep 2, a scene from Ep 7, and a scene from Ep 12, which were very varied. God. And I was just sitting there like, oh my God, she's done it. The thing I was anxious about, she just pulled that off. And it's incredible. Wow. And there were just scenes where I was like, this is incredible. I forgot that she's a brilliant actor as well. But she just wrote it and she's directing it. And so that was a brilliant moment. And then in the edit, when it, there's a bit in the edit where it's all a bit, you're looking at rough cuts and it's a bit, oh God, what is all this? But then as it's being fine cut and it's coming together and you just suddenly go, oh, right, okay, yeah, this is pretty good actually. I'm enjoying this. You move beyond the sort of feeling sick and like, oh God, have we got it phase to the like, I'm quite enjoying this. This is, if I'm anything to go by, I think people are going to quite like it. And so, there's different, there's ups and downs with it, but you just get lost in the process sometimes. You're just like so busy trying to make it, you can't almost see what you're making, or you sort of lose sight of it a bit. But
did you have all scripts before you started filming then? If Michaela was on set and acting in it, did you have locked scripts for all of it?
We did, actually. She kind of promised she would do it, and she did. Though, having said that, there was... as she kind of acknowledged recently on the Busters thing, she kind of would suddenly go, there was one episode that, everyone seemed to quite like, HBO, I remember HBO had one sort of little note on it. And then a few weeks, into filming, she was like, oh, I want to change that almost entirely. And it was like, what? Yeah. What? And she did. She just sort of rewrote. And there was a couple of episodes where she did do, I remember one episode in particular where she had it was like, I've had another thought. And that just got, you just have to roll with it in production. And she made some changes, but, she was always kind of adjusting things. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of rewriting stuff like a night or on the weekend before, just kind of going, oh, I think I can make that scene better. But I mean, it kind of worked like that. But, that's the kind of process. You just get used to it. And luckily we had a good team who weren't fazed by that.
Yeah, exactly. You could roll with it, like you said. Yeah. And adapt on the day. That's good.
It's funny. My next question was, you must have questions for each other, Sally. You just have to.
Well, Sally's just got hers in, but I'm not sure what. Johann, feel free to go next because I'm not sure what mine is.
Do you, Johann, have any questions for Roberto or Sally in terms of
I guess the thing is, this is for Sally, and it's about the fact that how you maintain series after series, how you keep keeping it fresh and maintaining that kind of incredible balance between black comedy and real emotion and thrill. I thought that's the thing. I have huge admiration for you about that, because it's such a mammoth task to keep on doing that.
It is really hard. And also, we then when Phoebe wasn't available to come back for the later seasons, we did make a mad decision that we were going to have a different woman author each season. And so Emerald Fennell came in and authored the second one. Suzanne Heathcote came in and did the third, and Laura Neal is doing the fourth. And actually Laura is the first writer we've had who worked on a previous season. So to have her to come through, who's already been sort of coached in the mood of the show, and seen her episodes brought to life. So going from outline to script, to seeing how the actors interpret them, to seeing how they are edited, I think has been absolutely invaluable for what she's doing now. And then because this is the last season, we're hoping that actually the freedom that you're then given, not to just like keep the machine going, but you can actually tell a story that comes to some sort of conclusion, and you can take your characters emotionally through a new arc where you're going to take even bigger risks. I hope that I think that is still really tough, but it's not as tough as trying to keep the same thing feeling fresh and different every time, I think.
All right, Roberto, did you have a question?
I don't, my mind's gone completely blank.
Well, that's okay.
Sorry.
I've got loads
I'm just
of
trying
them.
to think of something really profound and insightful to ask. I'm not profound or insightful, so
Oh, come on.
I'll just ask something silly. I really don't. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. We are closing in on our time here. But one thing I definitely want to ask is obviously all of you have been in the industry for quite some time. It's changed massively in the last decade, year, week, in terms of the consolidation and everything. This is really, a long time ago, the phrase was coined, the golden age of television, and I think that's just seems to be continuing. But what do you think is the key to longevity in what you do in this industry amidst it all, Sally?
What do you mean, us as individuals surviving?
Yep. Yeah.
Not reading reviews, not reading previews, continuing to be curious, actually. I mean, I think we're and this sounds, probably quite sort of Californian, but we're desperately blessed to do what we do and have conversations with the type of people we have conversations with every day, and to be curious about stories, and also just to like to mix things up. So, just challenge yourself every day, and try not to work with people that you know in advance are not very nice. And you get that, I think you get that that luxury as you get older, where you can make those choices. I think that's, I don't know, stubborn. It's about it really. But it's, we're not saving lives, we're making telly. So, just try to make it enjoyable. It's still tough though, still stressful.
No doubt. Johann?
Everything Sally said, everything. I have a really basic rule, which is get up one more time than you get knocked down.
Yeah.
That's it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down or knocked back or suffer. It matters how many times you get up. And that's you just keep going. That really is. I think that and what Sally said about not saving lives, context, just keep the context of what we're doing, perspective, that's all.
Keep it in perspective. Roberto, what do you think is the key to sort of longevity?
Well, I don't know if there's
going?
any one thing, but I think that, Sally and Johann have covered it there really. I think it is important to, put it into perspective generally, even, in terms of the company we set up and my business partner. One of our things was like, generally try and be nice, be considerate, just let's not be those guys. There's just so many of them. And I don't want to work with them, and I don't want to be one of those people. And I think, again, picking up on something Sally said, stay interested. This is possibly a really stupid thing to say on being recorded, but I oddly try not to think too much about like what the broadcasters want. I just try and think what excites me, what engages me, what would I want to watch. I always think, you know, we are, you know, so it says we're really blessed to be working in this industry. As I always joke, it's better than a real job. You know, it's not, we're not coal miners, it's a doddle comparatively. And I think if we're really, really lucky, then we get to make the kind of telly we want to watch. We get to make things that stimulate us and interest us. And I just try and focus on that and stay interested in things, not think about it just cynically like, oh, these, like I'm selling kind of units of, you know, like I'm in a branch of manufacturing. I mean, that's just not really very exciting, you know. So I just try and stay interested and stimulated and challenge myself and do things that are a bit different and think, would I like to watch that? Yeah, that looks good. I like that. I'd watch that.
That's great. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end today. I do want to thank you again for taking the time to chat with us. I want to congratulate you for being nominated for a Rockie Award. I truly hope that next year we can see you in the Rocky Mountains of Canada. It is truly the most beautiful place.
That would have been lovely.
Really lovely.
That really would have been, of all the years, for there to be a pandemic. He said,
can you make sure we come back next year?
Yes.
Absolutely, you're all welcome, and I will tell you, it's just a tonic to be there. You know, it's truly an inspirational place, and we really try with the festival to live up to that place and that view. So we hope that you can come back, and also just make sure that you tune in on June 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern. The Rockie Awards are going to be airing live on YouTube. So thank you so much, everyone. Take good care and stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. See you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.